Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining today's session. Looks like we still have a few people joining in, so we're just going to wait a minute or so, let everyone settle in, maybe get their lunch, and then we'll get started. All right, so it looks like we have a good amount of people on, so let's go ahead and get things started today. Thank you for joining today's session titled SEO and the Rise of AEO, Why Voice Search Matters. Today we're joined by experts from Calicube.pro and Trustpilot, of course, who will share how voice search is changing the SEO landscape for the coming months and years to come. As with most innovations, the first movers are usually the first to get rewarded, so we'll be sharing tips to get you started for the year ahead. Our panelists today are Jason Bernard. Jason has almost 2 decades of experience. He started promoting his first website in the year Google was incorporated and built it up to become one of the top 10,000 most visited sites in the world. Today, Jason works as a freelance consultant, author, speaker, in French as well as in English, on all things search marketing. We're also joined by Josue Ledesma, our global content marketing manager here at Trustpilot. Josue is responsible for content strategy, development, and execution, where he ensures that Trustpilot continues to be relevant to its audience and its customers. So moving right along here, let's get involved. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to type them in at any time on the control panel to the right of your screen. We'll make sure to get to those at the end. If we don't get to your question and we run out of time, no worries. We will be sure to follow up with you on a one-on-one basis, either today or tomorrow, depending on how many questions we have coming in. So thank you guys so much for joining, and I'll hand it off to Josue to tell you a little bit about Trustpilot.
Hi, everyone. I'd really like to thank Jenny for that wonderful intro. As she said, we're going to be talking about SEO, voice search, and AEO. And I know Jason's really excited to get talking about that a little later. Really quickly, just want to touch on what Trustpilot is. We're an online review management platform. We both serve the consumer, helping them choose the best companies and find the right products through our consumer-facing site, Trustpilot.com. And we also help businesses harness the power of reviews. Reviews are an excellent form of social proof. They can be used on site, on emails, on marketing material, both printed and digital. And we've seen a lot of companies succeed really well by using reviews in their marketing. And really our mission statement is to connect customers with great companies through their experiences. Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about Calicube here?
Yeah, thank you very much to both of you for the introduction. Calicube.pro is a company that are experts in brand authority. We help brands to build for the future where AEO is king, and understanding and credibility drive search marketing. We believe that brand authority is the future of AEO, answer engine optimization. It's the future of online marketing. And over 2017, we've developed a measurement of brand authority. And the insight we've gained into 25,000 brands with that measurement has meant that we are now a leader in understanding how Google is going to function in the future. Thank you.
Cool. So we're going to move through this presentation pretty quickly. Really, this webinar is kind of an offshoot of one of our white papers that we'll link to in an email after this. The white paper really covers SEO and answer engine optimization, which is the subject of today, in a much more in-depth setting than we are today. This white paper was co-written by myself and Jason, who's heavily whose contributions were very, very important to the white paper. And in it, you'll find how the rise of voice assistants and AEO are really changing the SEO landscape, what you can do to take advantage of kind of like this new area in search, why it makes sense to invest in AEO right now as a long-term strategy, and really give you actionable tips on how you can get started. The white paper also features the head of SEO for Essence, which is a Canadian e-commerce company that's really big over there. And so we have a little additional insights that you can get in the white paper. But we're going to be covering a lot of that in this conversation here. So do you want to go to the next slide? So we're going to touch on why voice matters. And on the next slide, we have a couple of really important stats. You can go back to that one. There were 33 million smart devices shipped in 2017. An estimation noted that over 60 million Americans will use a virtual assistant at least once a month. And there was a study done by a company that found that engagement in Alexa, which is Amazon's voice assistant device, and Cortana usage, which is Microsoft's voice assistant AI, it actually increased 300% in 1 year, which is huge. So these numbers really just kind of show you how voice assistants and those voice devices are really skyrocketing in use, not only in the US but global as well. And in the next slide, I think Jason will talk to you really about how voice search is going to start dominating the market. So Jason, I'll let you take this.
Yeah, we can make an analogy with voice assistants. With the move from desktop to mobile between the late 2000s and the beginning of the 2010s, it's interesting to remember that mobile went from 10% of search volume in 2011 to over 50% in 2014. So in 3 years, it went from a very small player to a very big player and the most important player today, to the point at which now Google is rolling out what it calls the mobile index, i.e., it is using the content that you show to your customers on mobile devices to decide if you are going to rank in its algorithm or not. We can imagine that the voice assistants will become the next big player, and that we will see a similar shift. It may well not be as fast. 3 years seems to me to be too short for this particular change, because it's a big change in people's habits, but it will certainly be very big. And we will also see that the results on desktop and mobile will evolve closer and closer towards this idea of giving a definitive answer to the user. So the switch to voice assistants will be both important in terms of the voice assistants, but it will also be very important because the results on mobile and desktop will evolve towards that same format. Thank you. Next slide.
Great. So to kind of jump off what Jason is saying, we're really going to see in the near future how voice will affect SEO and also just the way search engines work. So here we can see what the differences are between kind of like a voice search query and a regular search query. So a regular search query is something that you would search on your mobile device or on your desktop. They're often very short, they're specific, and they're standalone statements. So you can say kind of like best Android phone, or show me, or email marketing software. It's very succinct. It's usually about 3 to 5 words long, just because it gets right to the point. Voice search query takes advantage of the fact that we're actually saying our query. So they're always longer. They're usually posed as questions. And depending on what you're searching for, they're often tied to location. So you would say something like, where's the nearest pizza place? Or what's the best coffee shop around me? And Google needs to take into consideration where you are in order to serve you up whatever service it is. And this also matters a lot, not only for location-based searches, But whenever you're searching for anything, so if you're looking for an Android phone, your voice search query might be something like, "What's the best Android phone?" And the fact that the query is shifted differently than if you're just saying best Android phone, that's starting to affect the landscape. That's starting to affect the algorithm, and that's starting to affect what results are actually being shown to you. So, Jason, do you have anything to add on the major differences between a regular search query and a voice search query?
Yeah, just one small detail that is actually very, very important is that you mentioned what's the best Android phone. In fact, what we're moving towards is what is the best Android phone for under $100? What is the best Android phone for my needs, whatever they may be? And here we have I can just give a price, but also I can rely on Google knowing who I am, what my habits are, from my past searches and from my past behavior on Google products to actually give me the correct answer for that particular query. So the query becomes much more specific, and there is a need for Google to get those specifics about individual products, about individual businesses.
That's a great insight. So talking about, SEO and voice search, we'd actually like to toss a poll over to our listeners. And the poll really is just asking, is voice search part of your SEO strategy? So whoever's watching right now, feel free to answer that. And we can take a little bit of time to discuss that. As you guys are answering, I think we're going to move on to the next slide, which is really kind of like not only how are voice queries different from search queries, but how are the results different? And we're going to get into that a little bit more later. But really, when you're using a voice search, you're asking for an answer, as opposed to when you're making a search query, you're looking for results, and then you, on your own accord, will choose the best result. And we know usually that's either the first or the second results on Google. But when it comes to these voice queries, there really is only one answer. And I know, Jason, you know a little bit more about that, so I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, with a voice query, Google really has to give back the one definitive answer to the question I'm asking, and that definitive answer is for me at that moment. So it's very personalized, very specific to a particular moment, and the question of answer engine optimization is vital in the sense that if we have the offer that corresponds to the need of that person at that time, we have to make sure that Google understands that it can offer or it can propose that offer. And one extra point is that with answer engine optimization, we have to remember that desktop, mobile, and voice will all coexist. We're not saying we only need to look at answer engine optimization because that is where everything is going. We're saying that this is a new strategy, a new part of our strategy. We don't know what share it's going to take. But we need to optimize for that as well as optimizing for desktop and mobile, knowing that desktop and mobile will evolve more towards this idea of giving a definitive answer to somebody in a micro moment in their life to their needs, very personalized.
That's a great point. I think, we're not saying AEO is the end all be all and you should only focus on that. We definitely are recommending a balanced approach. And I think looking at the poll results that asked, is voice part of your SEO strategy, we actually have almost 70% of the respondents saying no. About 15% are saying yes, and then the other 15% are saying not sure. So really what this tells us is this is completely uncharted territory, and that's why we think, hey, this deserves your attention. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can start taking advantage of AEO soon. So
sure. I'd like to just reassure people who haven't got answer engine optimization as part of their strategy is that they're in the majority. Most brands have not yet put this in place. And it's a very good time to do it for exactly that reason. Sorry.
Yeah, No, that's a good point. So I think to give a little more foundational knowledge about what AEO is and how it's changing things, we're gonna get into our next section, the shifting landscape of search engines. So these are kind of like very short rules that we're gonna get into a little bit more in depth. But position 0 is the new page 1 when it comes to answer engines. This is what I was alluding to earlier of when you make a voice query, you're only getting one result, which is the quote unquote answer. So when optimizing for AEO, that's kind of the mindset you should be taking. Communication and credibility are incredibly important, not only for answer engine optimization, but SEO in general. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, why communication and credibility is so important. Localization is key. That's something that Jason was talking about before, where even if you're not making a query that is localized, if you're not saying something like around me or near me, Google, by knowing who you are and by knowing your profile, is already tailoring results by locality just because it knows who you are. So even though your search, whether it's voice or whether it's a regular search query, is not local in any way, your results are still being localized. And then AEO requires strategy. That sounds like an obvious statement, but something that came up in our discussions between myself and Jason and in putting together that white paper, it's really that SEO is a tactics-based approach where you're taking specific tactics to improve your SEO. AEO is actually going to require strategy. So it's more about just specific tactics, but it's more about a holistic vision in how you approach AEO.
Yeah. Sorry, can I come back to the slide before just to make a very quick point about the nature of an answer engine? It's very important to remember that it's looking to give the definitive answer. If it wants to give the definitive answer, it has to understand the world. It has to have knowledge and understanding of what it is we're offering, who we are, what my needs are as a searcher. Google has a thing called the knowledge graph, and the knowledge graph is a database of knowledge, things it knows, things it is sure of. And Hummingbird, if anybody has heard of it, was a new algorithm that Google launched a few years ago. And that was the beginning of Google putting in place its knowledge in the service of its search results. It's applying that knowledge to the search results. And that is the start of Google's algorithm evolving into an answer engine. So this idea that Google needs to understand the world is very, very, very important, and it understands the world through its knowledge graph. And we actually have access to what it has in its knowledge graph, which is part of what Kalicube Pro has been doing, which is asking Google, what do you know? So the idea of understanding is absolutely key, and that's the communication point that Jose made earlier on.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think we're already seeing some really good questions coming in from the audience. So I think I'm going to breeze by a couple of these slides. So Jason, if you want to jump in, just feel free to interrupt me. So I quickly wanted to give a visual representation of the differences between a search engine result and an answer engine result. Again, search engines, you guys know what this looks like. You get ads, you get sponsored results. You have a lot of options to choose from. Whereas the answer engine, you really just have one. And that's a huge difference in what a user is doing post search. So the first rule that we're going to come to is communicating to educate. And I'm going to let Jason go over this a little bit, but this is really one of the foundational points, not only of AEO, but the way SEO is going. So Jason, I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so I think one very, very, very important thing to understand for us as search marketers is that if Google is even to consider putting us in top spot, it has to understand what it is we're offering. If it doesn't understand what we have to offer, it cannot match that to the needs of the user who is making the search. Understanding is fundamental. And I talked about the knowledge graph earlier on. One might imagine that the knowledge graph is absolutely full of knowledge, and in fact, it's not. Google has the problem is that information is on the web is very fragmented. It's often inaccurate, contradictory, and it's very rarely practical for machines to digest. So it has a problem of sorting that data, of organizing it, confirming its veracity, and understanding the relationships between the different pieces of information. It has a list of information that it does not truly understand. And it's our job to make sure that Google can understand who we are, what it is we do, and what it is we offer to potential clients. So understanding is fundamental. If it cannot understand you, it cannot present you as the best solution to its users' needs at a given moment. Next slide.
Yeah, and just to quickly summarize what Jason's saying, I think the most important point of that is that it's the company's responsibility to make sure that they're leveraging tactics and the right communication approaches to make sure that Google knows what you're saying. And just to quickly go back to that one slide, we mentioned a couple of those tactics: structure, schema markup, semantic, HTML5, and more. Though that's how you communicate to Google in the right way. It's very technical, but it works, and you can see that in the knowledge graph, in knowledge panels, in answer boxes, in the form of rich snippets. Those things are they're examples of Google having the right understanding, and you can see that on the right-hand side here, where you can see, sponsored product listing ads, sponsored results, rich snippets here at the bottom. That means these companies are doing a good job of communicating to Google what it is they're offering. So going to the next slide, we're going to be talking about credibility, which is the other foundation of kind of making sure that Google is presenting you for the right results. So once a company does take the effort and the processes to communicate to Google in the right way, what makes Google sure that you're actually the right fit for a given user? I'm going to let Jason explain that here.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a situation where once Google's understood what it is you offer, what circumstances it will be interesting to its users who are making searches on Google, it can start to think, well, I can present this as the definitive answer. However, if it understands two different offers, you and your competitor, how does it choose between them? The answer is the credibility, i.e., how confident is it that you will fulfill the needs of the user quickly, efficiently, and give them the service that they want. The idea of credibility then becomes a second building block, i.e. rule 2. Once it's understood you, you have to make sure that it believes you are credible. And that is basically it. And what I really like about this new approach, it's a strategic approach that only has 2 pillars, and those 2 pillars apply to everybody. And that makes the approach that I'm bringing to my customers very, very simple.
Yeah, and I have this image here again just because I wanted to note, if you look, these are all different companies. The first 4 results are sponsored, paid results. And then the first organic result is from LensDirect, who is a Trustpilot customer. And as you can see, the most eye-catching element there is the nearly 5-star rating and the fact that they have 1,400 reviews, which are a lot. And that brings us to our next point. And this is something that we actually added very recently because there has been new research that shows the quantity of reviews actually matters a lot, not only for these search engines, but to consumers as well. Consumers are now really just valuing how often has a company served any consumer. And we're seeing that by consumers, they'll prefer a company that's a little lower rated if they have way more reviews than a company who has a higher rating but fewer reviews. And we're also seeing that play out for search engines as well.
Sure. I'd like to also add that in the previous slide, there was a one line which talks about mentions and links. Obviously, reviews aren't the only way to gain credibility. Having mentions and links, links is the old SEO tactic, but it's actually part of answer engine optimization strategy. But we can add to that the idea that we can be mentioned without having a link. As long as Google has understood who you are, it can relate. It can link that mention to you. So if the mentions are positive on relevant sites, within context of what it is you're doing, they are very, very important too. And exactly in the way that reviews require quantity, mentions and links also require quantity. So as long as they're always quality or they're majority quality, the quantity is always going to weigh very heavily in your favor.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out is that we're separating mentions from links because mentions don't necessarily have to have a link. And when I first was hearing this from Jason, I thought that was a huge insight because basically that means reviews are in play, social media is in play. Just any actual mention of a company can make a difference in SEO and AEO, even if there's no link associated, if you've taking the time and effort to make sure you're communicating to Google in the right way. And that actually brings us to our next section, which is what can I do about it? You know, we've talked to you about like, okay, how is AEO changing? How is SEO changing? Okay, now what can I do about it? So one thing that Jason had talked about earlier is we do want to stress the value of SEO. You know, AEO is mattering more and more every day, but that doesn't mean, okay, forget about SEO. Companies should still be using SEO tactics and also think about AEO as they work on their SEO strategy.
Sure. I mean, here it'd be nice to mention that, in fact, SEO tactics serve the AEO strategy. I've yet to find an SEO tactic that does not help AEO. We can take, for example, valid HTML. That implies that we're communicating better. Google is going to find it easy to understand what we're presenting, and it will be much easier for Google to digest the information we're presenting. If we look at quality relevant content, which is a very, very powerful SEO tactic, we're communicating more with context and credibility on our expertise on our subject. We look at alt tags for images, for example. We're communicating what those images are about. We're helping Google understand the content of the page. And if we look at links, we're building links and also mentions, which wouldn't be so much SEO, but we're building credibility. If you get a link from the New York Times or another major site, Yahoo News, obviously you become more credible. So we're looking at SEO tactics that are serving the AEO strategy, and the AEO strategy also includes additional tactics that didn't exist before, for example, mentions.
Great. And I think that brings us to our next slide, where we're going to get a little more tactical here. I think for the purposes of AEO, because it's so new and because it's kind of, again, like I mentioned before, uncharted territory, we're thinking of it as kind of like the Wild West of SEO. You just have to experiment. Google itself, and I think Jason will probably speak to it a little bit better than I can. Google itself is still figuring out AEO. They're still working with their voice engine optimization. So really what you as a company should work on is identifying key phrases and voice queries that are relevant to your company and that are working well. And also make sure that you're putting yourself in a position that can change because who knows what kind of changes Google is doing that may affect your AEO. So make sure you're kind of on top of it a little bit more than you usually are. And this really is going to give advantage to companies that are able to adapt really quickly. So if you're thinking of, if you're kind of like a giant company like, I don't know, Walmart, Staples, or Target, your SEO department is probably not fast enough to keep up with changes in AEO, and that gives you an advantage. Jason, do you have more to say here?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. It's really interesting to see. I mean, it's yet another opportunity where small companies, because they can act fast and because they can implement these very simple tactics, simple tactics that build into this overwhelming strategy. They can implement them faster, they can implement them more accurately, and they can actually gain traction and get an advantage. One very interesting thing about answer engine optimization is that in the SEO community, which is where I come from, Google got a lot of flack for maintaining the position 0, the answers, when it was getting the questions a little bit wrong. And the fact that Google didn't withdraw, it kept going, it kept going, it's kept going, it indicates how important it thinks this is going to be. So Google is willing to, is expanding, the idea of answers more and more, despite the criticism it's been having. And it's getting better and better, and less are we seeing these answers, definitive answers, being inaccurate or wrong. So keeping on top of that is incredibly important for any company that wants to cement its place for the future.
Yeah, and the next slide is a good one to I would actually recommend people to just screenshot, because this is what you can do not only to improve your AEO but your SEO as well. Jason, I know you wrote most of this, so I'll let you handle this slide.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough how important semantic HTML5 is. HTML5 or HTML is the code that actually indicates to the browser how it should display the content. Semantic HTML5 explains what the content is, i.e., you can identify to Google what is the navigation, what is the footer, and what is the core content of the page. It might seem like a very small point, but if you can say to Google, this is my core content, it can immediately focus on that and forget the rest. And it doesn't have to worry about doing it itself. And it's confident that that content is the main content. There's lots of other little details within semantic HTML5. It's a very complex subject, but it's very, very powerful because it identifies meaning within the content that you have without Google actually having to read the words. After that, obviously, you have the context, the words, the vocabulary that becomes very important. And structured markup is incredibly important too, because here what you do is you take the content in your page and you present it to Google in a machine readable format. So what it does is it looks at the content, it looks at your schema markup, and it says the two are the same. I am very, 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 very confident that I have understood what this page is about. And both of these bring both long-term advantages, but also short-term advantages. I've seen clients that I've implemented this for who see an improvement in rankings very quickly. And that comes down to this idea of confidence, that the Google is confident it has understood what it is we're saying. When we talk about trusted third parties, a lot of people ask me, who are the trusted third parties? That's obviously part of my expertise. But for example, Wikidata, it supplies Wikipedia. You don't need to be in Wikipedia to inform Google of who you are through Wikidata. Crunchbase is another good example. Government sites are a typical example. But people often forget associations or business organizations within your particular category of business are very, very important, because they carry a great deal of authority within your business. So you don't need an article from the New York Times. You can get an article from Yachting Monthly if you're a yachting company, and that will be just as powerful because they're so authoritative within that domain. And then the last one is the credibility through the mentions, links, and reviews. Obviously, social media platforms. Google manages to crawl, from what I understand, about 30% of social media, but that's still quite a lot. Positive social media interaction, talking with your clients, showing that you're interested in your clients. It's very interested in high traffic sites. Obviously, part of the whole job of what we're trying to do here is build traffic. Authoritative brands, and that's the brand authority that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Niche brands, and people often forget that. If, once again, the yachting example, if I'm a yachting company, I can be very, very, very important within the yachting community without being known to anybody in, or very many people in communities outside. So the niche aspect of this is very important. When we look at understanding a brand, we're understanding a brand and where it is situated within the world, what category it is in. And there you can identify niches, and you can identify brands that are important within each niche. And we'll see that a little bit later too. And lastly is third-party review sites. Obviously, Trustpilot is one, but there are a great number of them. And any feedback that you can have from your clients that is validated by a third party is very, very important. I think some companies make the mistake of thinking that they can put their own reviews, they can take their customer reviews that they've received by email and put it on their site, and that's going to be accepted. It's not acceptable. Reviews need to be validated by a third party. Whoever that third party may be, you need to find the third party that Google trusts the most within your market.
That's a really good point there, Jason. And I think now we can talk a little bit about brand authority and credibility and understanding, kind of putting it all together. And we'll let you talk a little bit about what you offer before getting into kind of reviews, trusted third parties, and why that actually helps in SEO and AEO.
Sure. Okay, I'm not going to make this into a sales pitch, but basically we started this a year ago because we really wanted to understand how Google learns and how it assesses credibility. And this came from my personal interest in the knowledge graph. The knowledge graph from Google is something phenomenally interesting. How does Google learn? How does it understand, and how does it assess the credibility of the information it receives, and how does it assess the credibility of the brands that it's looking at? So what we did was we asked Google the question. We collected a massive data, both from search results from Google. We asked it questions. So from its search results, but also from its own knowledge graph. As I mentioned earlier, we can look into its knowledge graph. It has a public interface for the knowledge graph that says what it knows, what it doesn't know, and how confident it is. So we collected a massive data, and we've invested a great deal of time to understand how Google is evolving into an answer engine, how it learns, how it understands, and how it intends to give the definitive answer to questions. And what, as a spin-off from that, we've learned is what brands can do to get ahead of the field. And we've just talked about understanding, communicating to educate, and credibility, and the technical side of HTML5 or human markup, but also mentions and links. I think the most important thing, what stands out for me from this last year of work, is that communicating, protecting, and promoting your brand is the single most important thing in AEO. And it is also very, very important in SEO. So SEO, the short term, communicating your brand is still going to bring benefits. And it's also going to push you towards the benefits in the future for AEO.
Cool. And really, are you okay with me going to the next slide, Jason?
Yeah, sure.
Great. And I just really want to give you a reminder. I think we have about 20 minutes left in the session. I think we're getting a lot of good questions from the audience. So let's breeze past through these so we can address some of those. Yeah,
I mean, I'll go very quickly. This is just some examples of points of how we measure brand authority. Obviously, presence in Google's knowledge graph. The results that Google returns for a brand, try searching for your brand. It's very interesting to see what comes up. And you can imagine that what comes up in the first 2 pages is what Google thinks about you. It's its opinion of you. And it's a very simple thing to do to understand how Google perceives your brand. Its capacity to categorize, which is very important. If it can't categorize you, it can't see what niche you're in. And then the credibility is the quality of the results. Once again, you can search for your brand, or you can search for an opinion, for example, reviews plus your brand, and get also the level of sentiment and buzz around your brand. We're looking at how credible Google perceives you to be. Thank you. Here we have brands that are relatively well understood. You can come back and look at this later, but basically we're looking here at the big brands people understand. Trustpilot actually is doing very well. Here we have the brand authority score, the understanding and credibility. We split it down into 2. Those 2 make up the brand authority score, and the categorizing that Google has made, and the rank of that site or that brand within that specific category. To move forward quickly, you can come back and look at that, or you can go on to CaliCube Pro and have a look at the brand authority scores on there. You can surf around. There's 25,000 brands. Here we get a good example of how Google is still struggling to fully understand. For example, it's put Interflora into the arts and entertainment category. Asus, instead of giving me a logo, it's given a telephone. We have direct travel. It's confused with the travel channel. It thinks Budget is in arts and entertainment, and it's given me the Polish fiat. And so what we have is that the brand authority, the vast majority, are in the 10 to 20 and 20 to 30 categories. So Google is still struggling to understand, and that indicates how much opportunity there is now. If you can get it to understand who you are, you can move up into those 4, 3, 2, 1%, and get into that leading pack.
Great, and really all of that shows you is, again, this is territory that's still new, not only for brands and companies, but for Google as well. So if you're asking yourself, okay, how do I increase my brand authority? How do I let Google know who I am and know that I'm credible? I would say reviews are one of them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection between reviews and search engines. So when we're talking about communication and understanding, reviews provide benefits on both sides. When you're putting reviews on your site, you're communicating to Google what it is you are and how you provide value to consumers. And reviews themselves, especially if they're on third-party websites like Trustpilot, those are those positive mentions that we talked about before that will add to your brand reputation. Jason, I know you can say a little bit about that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of review platforms. In SEO, they were a relatively minor aspect. In AEO, they're a fundamental aspect. And I now advise all my clients to do a search of their brand name plus the word review, see what comes up, and then look at. Sorry, I moved on to the next slide before you could do so.
That's okay.
And improve what Google already thinks is important. What it will turn up in those first 2 pages of results is the sites that it thinks are important in terms of your credibility. And the first thing you should do is search for those, pick them up, and improve them, because that's the path of least resistance. It's where you're going to make the most effect the most quickly. And then that last point is more, was it?
Yeah, so that last point really is gonna feed the next slide. So if you're asking yourself, okay, yes, I want reviews. Yes, I'm looking for third-party reviews. And you have the question, okay, which review is best for SEO and AEO? Jason actually did independent research on his own to find that answer, and that's on this slide here, and I'll let him talk it over.
Yeah, I mean, this was in terms of SEO rather than AEO, and it was looking at how present each of these platforms is in the search results, and how much traffic value. This is SEMrush data, if you know SEMrush. So it's independent data that I didn't make myself. I took the SEMrush data, and the traffic value indicates how much people are willing to pay or would be willing to pay to get that place in the search engines. And that's a very good measurement of how valuable those brand searches are. And Trustpilot, both in the UK and in the USA, are a good way ahead of the field in terms of SEO. And I also know that Trustpilot, and that's why I'm working with Trustpilot, is that they're interested in the idea of communication as well as credibility. And for me, that's fundamentally important. It's why today I'm speaking with Trustpilot, because I feel they understand the importance of that aspect.
Yeah, and I'm going to briefly mention why Trustpilot does so well when it comes to SEO. We have a highly credible consumer site. It's listed as we're actually number 197 on Mose's top 500 most important websites. Our traffic is crazy big, so we know that consumers keep coming back to us. Our integrations allow brands to communicate to search engines in the right way. That's why Lens Direct, which is the contact lens example I gave earlier, they have rich snippets on their search results because of our reviews. And any link or mention that kind of essentially connects your brand with Trustpilot is going to improve your credibility because of our brand authority. And you can see a little bit here about some of our accolades. And I know we have about 13 minutes left, So I'm going to breeze past as fast as I can through these sections before we get into the Q&A. So just a little bit more about Trustpilot. We're for consumers on our consumer site, but we're also for businesses. We automate your review collection. We allow you to respond to reviews and publicize your reviews and learn from them as well through our analytics. Here's just a little bit of Trustpilot by the numbers. We have actually that 36 million is a little outdated. We're actually nearing about 40 million reviews on our website. We have over 72 million visitors a year, which again, that's why we have this brand authority. That's why we have this brand credibility. Quickly, Jason, if you want to talk a little bit more about CaliCube before we move on to questions.
Well, this is more of a reminder. I mean, I mentioned the amount of data we've studied. Those are the numbers. If anyone's really interested in the numbers, other than me, because I'm very interested in numbers, I'm a statistician by training, then please take a screenshot. And those numbers, we've been analyzing all this data for a year now. We're now experts in brand authority, and we can help brands build for the future and help them to implement understanding and credibility to drive their search marketing.
Yeah, and if people want to get in touch with Jason, you can contact him at jason@jasonbarnard.com, and you can also follow him on Twitter at Jason M. Barnard. It's BARNARD. When we send you guys the slides, this slide is actually going to be updated with his information, so you'll have it there.
And you should actually just be able to search for my name, Jason Barnard. I've worked on my own authority, so I should come up top.
Yeah, I mean, if people can find you, they'd know. Great. So we're going to take a couple of questions. I think for the most part, Jason, I'm going to let you handle them. So we have one from Tim Mossholder. Do AEO strategies differ in a B2B versus B2C model?
Yes, but not a great deal. The credibility question is a lot less to do with reviews and a lot more to do with peer group approval. So basically, it's the same with a different weighting from the credibility point of view. The understanding is simpler than, for example, an e-commerce site because there's a lot less products. When you're B2B in general, there are less products. So the understanding aspect is the same, and the credibility aspect is just more weighted towards peer group approval.
That's a great answer. We have something similar, a similar question by Kelly Brackett saying, how can a small e-commerce business that sells nationally optimize for AEO? Jason, I'm going to let you answer in a second, but this is actually something that's a little bit covered in our white paper. Again, one of our other featured contributors is the head of SEO for an e-commerce company. And really what I'd say to that, and Jason, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that although you sell nationally, you should look for ways where you can optimize for any regional or localized results. For example, if you're shipping in Oregon, like maybe have something that talks about that, so then Google knows, okay, no matter if this person is in Oregon and is looking for X kind of product, they should be this is a good company that they should look at. Jason, do you have more on this?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I would recommend to use schema markup, structured markup on your product pages, and you can actually indicate where you deliver to. And if you're very explicit with that, or in using a language that Google can digest very easily, which is the structured data markup, which you can look at a little bit as Google's language. You're speaking Google's language. You're presenting information in a way that it can easily digest, it can understand, and it's sure that it's understood. So I would say, take your products and say, here is my delivery area. And here is how I deliver. And you can even cite the transport companies you use. And that breeds understanding for Google, but also confidence that you can actually fulfill the needs of its client.
Great. And we have another question. I actually really like this question from Tim Mossholder again. Are there differences in how platforms interpret spoken questions, i.e. do Alexa and Cortana think about your questions in ways that make platform-specific optimization worthwhile. So, Jason, kind of to put it another way, should companies be thinking about AEO for Cortana and then AEO for Alexa and then AEO for Google, or should it really just be more of a holistic approach to AEO in general?
Well, the really nice thing about AEO is that if they've understood you and they're confident that you're a credible solution for their users, they will present you. So in fact, that strategy works for every single platform. What is interesting is that their capacity to understand what it is we're saying depends a great deal on the amount of user data they've got. And Google has a lot more varied data. Alexa is a little bit behind on that, and Microsoft certainly struggling to keep up because of a lack of data. So you can expect Google to understand more quickly than Microsoft or Alexa, which is partially Microsoft. So I would say the strategy is exactly the same, but don't expect Microsoft to understand as quickly as Google.
Cool. And I think we were having a number of different questions, and I think this came from the beginning of our presentation when we were talking about the knowledge graph, but also brand authority and the strength of links and specific sites. Jason, in general, what are your recommendations for one? I think you mentioned this earlier about accessing kind of the knowledge graph, and do you have any recommendations on any other kinds of tools, just so a company has a better understanding of, one, their own brand authority, two, whether they're communicating to Google in the right way, three, the knowledge graph, and then four, how strong specific links are or mentions are for a given company?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Moz earlier on. They have a measure of domain authority. That's now outdated. We're not interested in domains because Google is now looking to understand what a brand is. So the domain is subservient to the brand. So we're looking at what brands are citing us, whichever of its domains it cites us on. In terms of actually measuring how much Google has understood, there is the API. Google has an API. If you don't know how to use an API, you can come on to calicube.pro. We have a little tool where you can type in any term you want, and it will give you what Google's knowledge graph contains, which you will find surprisingly often is nothing. If you type in Britney Spears, you'll get quite a lot of information. If you type in your brand, you probably won't. If you want to actually compare, if you want to look at how powerful a brand is, then you can look at calicube.pro's brand authority score, which is the equivalent of what was domain authority but is now brand authority. We're measuring the brand and not the domain. Microsoft also have a knowledge graph, and they also have an API that gives you an insight into what they've got, but they're a lot less open about it. So it's very difficult to understand or to see how much Google knows, and that's what Calicube Pro is doing. And if you want to know if you've installed or you're communicating correctly, you need to look at or ask your technician to look at the schema markup that you're using and semantic HTML5. Those are the minimum that you should be using.
That's really good insight. I just want to actually shout this out from Gwen Barron, who says, "LOL, every time you say Alexa, my Echo turns on." We just thought that was hilarious. Sorry, Gwen. We have one other question, I think, from Darnell Nance, who says, can a small brand manage or leverage semantic HTML5 itself, like AdWords, or do we need an outside expert? What do you think, Jason?
Well, I actually wrote an article on SEMrush. So if you search for SEMrush semantic HTML5, you should come across. I wrote 2 articles, one of which is for structural HTML5, and the other of which is for HTML5, semantic HTML5 for your content. So one's for content writers and one's for the technician who actually builds the page. And when you read that article, I hope it becomes very clear that semantic HTML5 is not very complicated. You don't need an expert. If you read the article and get somebody who knows a decent amount about HTML5 and semantics, you'll be fine. That's one of the things I like about HTML5 it's much easier to implement than schema markup. So the answer is you don't need a top of the range expert to be able to do that.
Great. And then we also had a number of different questions on people asking how to collect third-party reviews, or what are some of the best websites. Of course, we are Trustpilot, the leader in review management. So of course, we're going to point to ourselves, definitely. If you are interested in learning more about how you can collect reviews with us, please reach out to us, either at events@trustpilot.com or anything like that. What we will say is that with us, it's very easy to send out invitations, send out invitation reminders. So then any of your customers will be putting reviews that get on Trustpilot.com, which again will feed into your brand authority because it is mentioning your company. So we have 2 minutes. We're going to let you guys get back to your days. I'd really like to thank Jason for his amazing insight. It's very rare that we have somebody with his level of expertise on one of our webinars, so I'd really like to thank you. Jason, are there any last words you have to say before we take off?
No, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that absolutely lovely complimentary comment at the end.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, whoever's still on. We'll be reaching out to you shortly and also linking to that white paper as it has a lot of good additional information that we didn't touch on today.
Yep, and once you exit out of today's session, you'll receive a quick survey. Please fill that out. We are a company that's built on feedback, so we'd really appreciate your thoughts on our webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.